Action.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, maybe. It's good morning right now when we're filming this on Sunday. Thank you for tuning in for the next episode of the Grudge Report featuring The Expanse. Today, we're going to be talking about Season 5, Episode 5, Down and Out is the name. I'm Margaret, and I'm joined as always by Franck Marchis, who is a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute, as well as chief scientific officer. Is it scientific or science officer?
Scientific officer.
Scientific?
Officer, yeah.
Okay, great. He's the chief scientific officer at Unistellar. And as always, I'm going to give you a great spoiler warning. If you aren't caught up on The Expanse, turn back now or you will be spoiled, because we are going to get into some of the developments in this episode of The Expanse and the cool science that the show touches on. So hopefully you're either ready to be spoiled or you're all caught up. But before we get to the episode itself, I just want to take a moment to say I have been vindicated by a kind soul who left us a comment. Their name on YouTube is FAQ or FAQ Google. So whoever you are, even if you're a bot, thank you. They pointed out that there's a little bit of a goof up on the side of the production for The Expanse, because at the end, I believe, of episode 3, we have the first asteroid impact on Earth. And we have that great and also sad scene where we have a fisherman using some sort of device to kind of go fish watching. And you see this sign, and it is in a Bantu language, which is, according to the commentator and my quick research, spoken in South Africa, a native language spoken in that area. But then in a news report later that we see, the newscaster says that the asteroid hit had an impact on Senegal, which is northwest Africa, correct? And they speak French there. At least that's some of the population does. I'm sure there are plenty of other languages, but not Bantu languages for the most part. So I know I've already issued my formal apology, but I'm slightly vindicated on the laziness of the Expanse crew, I suppose. So thank you for leaving that comment. And thanks for all the other comments. We've got some really great discussion going. So we look forward to seeing what you have to say about this episode. So asteroids, Franck, I know they're your favorite and they feature prominently in this season. So what did you think of one of the final scenes of this episode where Amos and Clarissa, who he calls Peaches, have escaped the prison, which I think saved their lives, but when they get out onto the surface, it's absolute devastation. Was that realistic to you? What did you think?
Yeah, that's realistic if you are close to the impact, the crater. In the case of this asteroid, I remind you, we are talking about a 30-meter asteroid made of iron and nickel. So you expect, now we have some information as well on the impact angle.
Oh, really? What did they say?
Remember, we have seen the scene at the end of the previous episode where the asteroid hit Earth like straight ahead. So it's an impact angle very close to 70 degrees, which was the assumption I took for my calculation. So in this case, my favorite calculator told me that we're gonna have an explosion which will release an energy close to 2 to 5 megatons of TNT. So that's a gigantic explosion. Okay, we are talking about 100 times Hiroshima again. Mm-hmm. So we are talking about here of a crater of 1 kilometer diameter. And if you are located, I will say 10 kilometers away, you will basically get the blast. It will move buildings, building will collapse. So I don't know how far is the prison from the impact crater, but this is the case that we have seen here. We are at least 10 kilometers away from the impact crater.
Yeah, at least.
So I want to talk a lot about impact, of course, because that's really the interesting part of this episode. I don't know if I told you, but every 2 years, we have this conference called the Planetary Defense Conference, organized by the IAA, which is a conference very special conference. I wrote a blog post a year ago about it because it's a conference where we basically have engineers, space mission, designer, space agencies, political groups, insurance, FEMA.
Insurance companies?
Yes, the
Oh,
insurance company come too. And we have basically a conversation about asteroid impact. And every year, on the top of this scientific presentation that you always have in conferences, which are often interesting but also kind of boring after an entire week, we
mhm.
have what we call a scenario simulation. Paul showed us from the JPL and others organized basically a simulation. So the last year we started with a simulation of they discover an asteroid. There is a it's realistic. So we use a telescope that really exists. Okay, so an asteroid that could potentially impact Earth. It was a Torino scale 2, and it was 200 meters roughly in diameter.
So that's pretty big.
Yeah. So what do we do? So everybody split. It's at toward the end of the conference around 3 p.m. And we
Yeah.
all take a role of either a decision maker, an astronomer, a politician, whatever, and we take decisions. We divided ourselves in groups. Some of us um, pretend to be part of the E1, which is an official United Nations endorsed committee, which basically propose a response in case of a threat like that. And then we basically decide what we're gonna do. So and we go back
What
to
did you
Paul.
guys decide, Franck? I need to know. What did you do?
We had decided to design space mission that will explore, and one of them had a nuclear device in it. And after a few days, we characterized the asteroid and we refined the threat. It will impact Earth, but the impact corridor, we call this, was going all the way from LA to New York, all the way to Africa. So
Mm,
there was an uncertainty on the position here.
sure.
After sending the spacecraft, a reconnaissance spacecraft, we refined the orbit and it was in the US. We decided to blow up the nuclear device. It fragmented the asteroid, but a large fragment remained, a 60-kilometer fragment.
So that's still big.
Yeah, that's still big. So
Not
remember,
as
in
big
the
as
show, we have a 30-meter fragment, but it's made of iron and nickel. In our case, in our simulation, we have a 60-kilometer fragment made of rock. The amount of energy is more or less the same. We're talking about 10 megaton of energy released by the impact.
it's the same between what's happening in the expanse and what you did in your simulation.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it was crashing nearby on a corridor that was going from Iowa to New York, just to give you an idea. I will put the
Yeah.
map of that simulation. So,
As they do in the expanse. Put the
so
map up.
then, what really interested me during this conference is that we had a group from NASA. They call themselves the Impact Simulation Group. They have a better name than this. I cannot find it, but they have a very interesting tool. This tool is basically a tool that allows them to estimate the impact, the effect of an impact on the planet, taking into account the asteroid itself, so its magnitude, its size, its the orbit, the class, the composition, the type, the impact itself, the crater that will be formed, and so on, but also what happened on this area of Earth. So if there is major cities, sensitive infrastructure, bridge, etc., etc. So I look at this, their work, and it's a very interesting work. I will put some link. One of the figure they had was basically considering the uncertainty of the impact along the corridor in the US, what will be basically the amount of people affected by this impact. And when I say affected, is that people who could die or people who could be affected because their work will be basically destroyed, their life will be their habitation will be destroyed.
Right.
And in the case of this simulation, if you look around Pennsylvania and New York, you have exactly 1 million people affected by this.
Yeah, it's a heavily populated area.
Yeah, it's crazy that it will affect that many people, because this is a very dense area of the world, and they also take into consideration the economical impact of this. Um, I have the number here. I'm looking at that. So if you look at the U.S. metropolitan area called New York, Newark, Jersey City, New Jersey, for instance,
Right.
the gross metropolitan product, which is basically the wealth of this area, is 1.8 trillion of dollars. So you basically baptize an entire area which has a wealth of 1.8 billion trillion dollar. It's enormous. It's a huge impact on the economy of a country. And the total population in this area is 24 million people. So
Yeah.
that's the largest, the ninth largest mega city in the world. Right? So that's what happened in the show here. Even if the explosion is not that energetic, I mean, it's a few megatons apparently. Um, the point of impact in Pennsylvania, it's a very sensitive part of the world, probably. And that's the reason during the show, they say that this will have an impact on the economy of Earth. And they even mentioned that a lot of resources are being dedicated now to mitigate the effect of the impact.
Yeah, and we aren't, yes. So that's probably, that impact was huge and will have a huge negative impact on the economy of the US, but probably the economy of the world, because there are two other impacts that happened as well. So we're talking about just death and devastation. And I'm imagining that many impacts would have negative consequences on the air quality, right? Like the atmosphere and the climate of Earth over a long period of time. Would you think that that would happen too?
I don't think that. I
No?
don't think so, because this is the amount of energy released here is equivalent to the amount of energy released by large volcanoes,
Okay.
like the volcano in Iceland with a name which is unpronounceable, so I cannot say it. Um, I think the amount of energy released was the order of the megaton. I mean, there is dust in the atmosphere. It may decrease the average temperature of Earth by a few degrees Celsius, but I don't think it will have an impact more than this. Dusty atmosphere, yes. Probably very colorful sunset as well. You're probably too young, but when we had the Pinatubo, this is a volcano in the Philippines, I think. I remember the sunset at the time was amazing, because there was a
Yeah.
lot of dust in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And it decreased slightly the temperature of the summer in Europe by 0.2 degrees Celsius or something like that.
Yeah.
So we may have that, but that's nothing compared to the impact on the population, on the economy itself.
Which already seemed to be in a bad spot on Earth, right?
Yeah,
That was sort of some of the plot of earlier seasons. So Marcos has definitely dealt a heavy blow to Earth.
yeah. So I would like to mention that everybody said that this show is very accurate scientifically speaking. It's true, but sometimes there is some mistakes, and one of them they made that during the when we can hear some news, and they say that the explosion released 200 to 300 kilotons of TNTs on Earth. That's not true. It's 10 times more than that, by the way.
10 times more. So they
It's probably 2 megaton of TNT, or 10 megaton, between 2 and 10 megaton of TNTs. And that's the reason the impact is so significant, because 2 megaton of TNT is basically what we call a major airburst. And that's basically what we have seen for Chelyabinsk. Remember this asteroid that blew up above the city of Chelyabinsk? So it was more or less this kind of energy. I mean, that's significant. It can destroy windows, but it's not the type of devastation we can see in the show.
that we saw, in the plane view.
Yeah, in the plane, and after when they get out of the jail, which is I mean, it's the scene. It's another remarkable scene of the show when they see they climbing into the cage, elevator cage, and they see the sky, and they wonder how can we see the sky? We're supposed to be
there's a building.
in the building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that was a very interesting scene for many reasons. I mean, that imagery was terrifying, but then also we got a peek into I forget his name, but he's the guy who's helping them because he has strength body modifications, and he and Amos get into a tussle, and we're not used to seeing Amos being thrown around or facing off against somebody who's stronger than him. So that was terrifying, but also kind of an entertaining moment of the episode as well. Anything else on the impact, Franck? There are a couple other things that are interesting that happened this episode scientifically.
No, for the impact, that's all. I would just mention that next conference, the next planetary defense conference is going to be this year. We're supposed to meet in Austria in Vienna, and we will probably do the same kind of exercise. And people can watch it live. Or we basically show this live so people can participate even if they're not part of the conference. So I hope it's going to happen again this year, because with the situation we don't know. But it's very interesting that I've been participating to this conference for 8 years now, something like that. And it's incredible the progress we have made in 8 years by addressing this problem of planetary defense. I would mention, for instance, there is a group in Los Alamos. They can simulate the impact fully now, and generate as well the effect of the air blast on the surface, considering the building size, considering the topology of the surface as well. So we're reaching to the point where we can understand to the few meters what will be the impact, we think, of those asteroid impact. And that's the reason insurance are interesting in this kind of conferences, because maybe one day they will offer, I don't know,
I was going to ask if I should get asteroid impact, like insurance, Franck. I need to know.
And that will depend on how is your house compared to the rest of the topology. If you're behind or between, in a valley, for instance, you're probably going to get much less affected than if you are on the top of the mountain. Yeah.
Something to keep in mind if you're in the market for a house. Okay. So then because we want to talk about Bobby and Alex, because they have some interesting discussions about some places in the solar system. But before we get to that, let's just do a really quick recap of 3 plot threads that I think are converging. We have, what should we start with first? So let's talk about my girl, Kamina Drummer, because she opens the episode and she is the Belcher pirate who gets a call from Marcos after she's talked to her crew about how she wants to assassinate Marcos. And so Marcos has invited her to join him for a discussion. And we're not quite sure what that's going to be, but she has agreed. And then, of course, on Marcos' ship, we have Naomi, who is one of the main characters, crew of the Rocinante. She used to be involved with Marcos and some of these extremists. And so their son, who she's estranged from, Philip, is also on the ship, and there's some really great dramatic acting. And Naomi is very distraught about what's going on, and she ends up getting a hold of a communicator super quickly in order to dispatch a message to Holden to warn him about some sort of code, the Gamara code, I believe, that's on the Rocinante. And Holden is on Tycho, where we had complete devastation and the death of Fred Johnson last episode. Holden was going to try and go after the Zimya, the ship that has the proto-molecule. But he can't, because the Rocinante has been, it's not safe to pilot. It would explode. So those 3 plot lines, I think, are sort of intersecting. I will say I'm a little confused about Marcos's grand plan, because he said that the vacuum of space, the rings, and the ring worlds are all the property of the Belters. But we have this really great conversation between, I can't remember the character's name, but somebody in Marcos's crew and Naomi, and they're talking about how, Belter culture is sort of in this precarious situation because the Belters can't live on planets. And so I'm sort of confused about why they want the planets in the ring worlds, because they can't live on the ring worlds, and as soon as they have kids and their kids live on the ring worlds, those kids won't be Belters anymore. So I'm sort of confused about why Marcos wants those worlds, but I think we're going to find out more, hopefully, in future episodes. What do you think?
in the scene, it basically says something like they make us thirst for water, gasp for air, and Marcos
Yeah.
wants to build something for all the children of the Belters. So his plan must be something bigger than controlling the ring gates. His plan is probably to kind of create, give access to water, air, and resources to the Belters by colonizing those planets. And he thinks that he may not be able himself or the Belters himself to colonize the planets, but if they have access to the rings and they control the rings, then they will be able to request some taxes or air, water for every transaction happening. They will basically take 10% as commissions, and that will be allow them to get richer.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and I think that's why he might be interested in talking to Kamina, because Kamina has exactly that. She's controlling access to the area around the rings, the portals. Or maybe they're going to colonize the planets and not live on them, but take the resources so that they never want for air or water or other things while they're in space because they can't live on the planets. I don't know, but so far he's been able to push his plan forward, so good for him, I guess. Let's talk about Alex and Bobby because they are still on their ship, which I feel like they've been on their ship for quite a while now in the timeline of the show, but they are chasing down the Barkeith, which is a Martian Navy vessel that they suspect is doing some sort of sketchy weapons transaction with the Belters. And they're proven correct, but they name drop a lot of interesting places in the solar system. First being Titan, because Alex tells Bobby that he's flying in such a way that they could easily be dismissed as tourists heading to Titan. And Titan is a really interesting place. It's a moon of Saturn, and I believe it has methane lakes. We have some pictures of it, and it looks eerily like Earth in a way, with mountains and bodies of liquid on the surface. How do you feel about Titan, Franck?
Well, I like the fact that they dropped the name Titan in the show, even though we don't see it. So I remind you that they are sailing. They are in the spacecraft, which is kind of a touristic and no weapon spacecraft, super fast. It should be like kind of. I think it's kind of like a catamaran on the sea, like a very fast.
Yes, they're in the bougie spaceship.
A bit bougie, yeah.
Yes.
And they're going from Mars to the outer part of the solar system. So, of course, they claim to go to an interesting place, which is Titan. So, Titan is definitely an interesting place. I mean, I would love to see it myself. It's the second largest moon in the solar system after Ganymede. But it's very close. If you include the atmosphere, the dense atmosphere of Titan, Titan is the biggest one in size. Okay. And people have always a hard time to understand, but when we're talking about a big moon, this is a moon which is bigger than Mercury. So the moon of Titan and Ganymede are bigger than the planet Mercury, to give you an idea. So that's a big world. Okay, with bigger than the moon, for instance, right. Our moon. So Titan has been visited by the Huygens mission, launched by ESA. It's a lander that basically landed and stayed over there, took a few pictures, and we have very few pictures, unfortunately, but it's kind of a very interesting world because it has a very dense atmosphere of nitrogen, like our planet, but it has also a lot of organics in it, apparently, and a very cold temperature. So it's so cold on Titan that it can rain methane, and we have lakes of methane and ethane on the surface. We have now some kind of liquid on Titan. So the chemistry over there is totally different. And probably the reason tourists in the show are going there is probably to be able to enjoy, to see completely exotic world. So how they do that, I would love, as I say, to see how they really visit Titan, because I don't think landing on the surface of Titan is a kind of a great idea because it's a very cold world. So if I was visiting Titan, I will do something like a balloon station floating in the atmosphere. So you can
like Cloud City in Star Wars, sort of. You would just hang out.
Yeah. And In fact, that was an idea for a NASA mission. That was kind of a
Really?
proposed NASA mission to have balloons on the atmosphere of Titan to observe the surface. But at the end, NASA selected a mission called Dragonfly, and it's a mission that is not a typical mission because it's a rotorcraft. So it's not a rover, it's not a lander, it's not a satellite in orbit. It's a rotorcraft. So it's kind of a big drone, we say, that will be launched in 2026 and should arrive in 2034. So we're talking about in 13 years here. And the goal here with this rotorcraft is to be able to move around in the atmosphere of Titan, fly in the atmosphere, and observe the most interesting places. So the lakes, for instance, the rivers, and be able to analyze the surface composition, detect probiotic chemical elements, maybe study volcanic activity, because we suspect there is volcanic activity on Titan as well. I mean, I'm looking forward to see the first movies taken by Dragonfly of the surface of Titan. That will be, I think that would be an amazing moment to be able to see Titan, like flying on Titan.
Yeah, I did not know that Dragonfly was going to be a drone. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Elizabeth Turtle is a PI of this project, and she has been talking about this mission for years and years. So I'm glad he has been selected.
Yes. Yeah, and it's there's also to me the moons of the outer solar system are super interesting. That's why I have Europa in my background. And there's also a mission to Europa coming up, I believe. I'm not sure if it has been selected or funded, but there have been a lot of ideas about clippers.
It's been selected, yeah.
It has. Okay, great. Yeah, because it's I think as our thinking about potentially habitable places, interesting places has evolved away from planets to include also moons around larger celestial bodies, because as you point out, moons around really, really big gas giants are pretty big, big enough to do a lot of really interesting things. So I also love the name drop of Titan in this episode, but they also name drop a lot of, or not a lot, but a pretty well-known asteroid system. Is that right? The Hungaria system?
The Hungarian group.
The Hungarian group. Okay.
That's the way they call it. Yeah. And that's a technical name that is used by astronomers.
Really?
Yeah. So it's a group of asteroids, which is kind of weird. It's the inner part of the main belt.
Okay.
Between roughly 1.82 AU. So it's very close to Mars. And what is interesting with this population of asteroids is that they have a very high albedo. So that means they're very shiny.
They mentioned in the show.
Yeah, they mentioned in the show. They show them. The albedo, for those who want to know, is 0.3. The typical albedo of a C-type asteroid is 0.07. Mm-hmm. So that means that they reflect 30% of the light that they receive, invisible. Wow. So they're shiny. They're bright. They are very interesting as well because they kind of locked into these two resonances between Mars, produced by Mars and by Jupiter. But Jupiter is a 9-2 resonances. So that means that when they turn 9 times around the sun, Jupiter turns 2 times around the sun. And if you basically enter into this area as an asteroid, your orbit is becoming very eccentric or very inclined, and you basically get ejected most of the time. So that's why there is it's a population very well identified in the inner part of the main belt. Yeah, the same happened with Mars on the other side. So they are locked there. They cannot move there. You remember one of the show I mentioned that we have different type of asteroid. We have the C type, which are dark, fragile. We have the S type, which are made of kind of rocky. We have the M type, which are metal asteroids. So those Hungarians most of them are E type. Another type of type.
It's a subtype.
It's a subtype of the S type, we will say. So they are rocky, and E because we think they have a composition which is dominated by a mineral called enstatite or enstatite. I never know which way you say it in English, but it's iron poor mineral made of. There is a lot of magnesium in the pyroxene.
Okay.
It's one of the few rocks with a crystalline structure that's been seen in a galaxy. Even you can see those in interstellar medium, for instance. So they are bright because of that, because they have very different composition. Why they have this composition? That's a very interesting question, and I'm sure you were thinking about that. Well,
Do we know why, or is that still a mystery?
I think we don't really know yet. We think they're part of a collisional family.
Okay.
So there is an asteroid called Hungaria, and it's the biggest one one of the biggest one in this population. There's the same composition, and this is a big fragment, a remaining fragment of a collision that happened billions of years ago. And we still quantifying this. We don't really know yet when this happened, and we are not 100% sure of the size of the proto-asteroid that got destroyed, forming this population of small asteroid. And why they're different in composition? But it's maybe because this proto-asteroid was different in composition. Maybe it was a piece of an asteroid that formed a different temperature, a different condition in the past. There's a lot of mysteries like this in the main belt. In fact, we have seen a lot of those collisional families with asteroids which are different in composition. Vesta is one of them. I mentioned Vesta like 2 weeks ago, but this is another one. It's an E-type. Hungaria is an E-type. We have seen an E-type asteroid from close. That's the asteroid called Steins, that was visited by the Rosetta mission in 2008. So Rosetta is an ESA mission which was launched to explore a comet, Chury. That's not a real name. We call it Chury because the name is a bit complicated. And on the way there, they did exactly like what they're doing in the show. This mission fly by an asteroid, an Hungarian asteroid, Steins, and took pictures of it and spectra. So now we know more about the shape and so on. I will put a picture of Stein. It's bright. He has this kind of diamond shape. And what you don't see because you have human eyes, we can see from the color that the composition is enstatite and others.
Interesting. Okay, I have a bit. I would like to ask a question about the asteroid belt since we're on this topic, because when I studied the solar system first in school, they made it kind of seem like all the asteroids in the solar system are in this nice little ring in between Mars and Jupiter, and that's not the case, correct? There are asteroids everywhere in our solar system. Is that right?
Yeah. There is asteroid everywhere in our solar system. There is area where there is a high concentration of asteroids. Mm-hmm. The main belt is one of them. That's why you probably learned when you were a kid about the main belt.
Right.
Then we discover more asteroids. Specifically, there is another area of concentration of asteroids which are called the Trojan Asteroids, mm-hmm. which are ahead and behind Jupiter. It's a swarm of asteroids orbiting at the same period than Jupiter. And then in 1992, we discovered the first what we call trans-Neptunian object, an object which is beyond the orbit of Neptune. And since then, we have seen a lot of those. So now we can detect dwarf planets, so gigantic bodies almost as big as Pluto, which are orbiting far away from us. Those trans-Neptunian objects are really truly a mystery.
Is that the Kuiper Belt?
Yeah, that's the Kuiper Belt.
Area. Yeah.
So that's something I noticed in the show. They talk a lot about main belt asteroids. They talk a lot sometimes about NEAs, but then the rest is not really mentioned. And I don't know when the book was written, but I think that's the reason. Because the discovery of those additional asteroids was made recently. Right. And that's the reason probably the author didn't really know about the existence of the Kuiper Belt and the trans-Neptunian objects, which are extremely interesting by themselves because we have a lot of now information about them. So we know that they are full of organic material. Recently, the mission New Horizon fly by one of them. Yeah. And you probably have seen this picture of a bilobated asteroid. His name is Icaros. Yeah. And flattish on the top of that. If you look like this, it's flat. So it's very, very weird shape and very red, very full of organics, apparently. Some papers are going to be published very soon to describe the shape and the composition of the surface.
Yeah, asteroids are very interesting. I'm sure because they are created in all different sorts of processes, impacts, or just planetesimals that didn't quite make it to be planet-sized, and all sorts of composition. And it's very interesting to me. It's probably why you study them, Franck, I would guess, because they are interesting in that way.
So one of my colleagues used to say that when you study asteroid, you basically the archaeologist of the solar system. Because what we do when we study asteroid, we kind of see the past of the solar system. We see every time we see an asteroid, we basically try to connect its history to the rest of the solar system. And there is always some interesting stories. They can be part of a collisional families. They may have been formed a long, long time ago when the solar system was full of this icy asteroid. And in this disk of planetesimals, we call them, the relative speed between themselves was very small. So they were all orbiting at the same speed around the sun, and sometimes they have this kind of gentle collision.
Interesting.
And then we have these crazy systems like Cleopatra or Calliope, which are triple or binary asteroid systems, and those we think are formed by catastrophic disruption. So gigantic one blew up in small pieces, then the big fragment accreted first, and then there was a swarm of tiny materials around, and they form and they gather again to form a moon.
Yeah, because you have some asteroids that are rotating around the sun, and then they also have small asteroids rotating around them. Yeah, right. Have all these systems that are quite intricate. Well, I'm sure there will be plenty more asteroid talk in the episodes to come. I'm hoping more of them don't hit Earth, but who's to say? Is there anything else in this episode that caught your eye, Franck? I have to say, after the action of last episode, this one was a little bit more slow paced, which I think was good, but there weren't too many huge developments.
No, what caught my eye, is more a joke than anything else, is when she visits Naomi visits the spaceship of Marco. She walks around and she wants to eat something, so she's eating some kind of spaghetti, and she warmed those in the microwave. So in 200 years in the future, we have still some microwave. That's a very important part of the show, I think.
Yeah.
The microwave has a blue light inside. That's the main difference. That's the way we know that there is a microwave from 200 years in the future. Mm-hmm. And she also used a coffee machine, which really looks like the kind of coffee machine you see in Austria, for instance, in bar and restaurants. It's the same brand, I think.
The fancy kind of like espresso machine that they have.
Yeah. I like looking at some of those tiny details from time to time to joke about it, but yeah, it's interesting that sometimes some objects like this, they don't evolve that much, but then they have this spacecraft as fast.
Yeah, they're floating in space.
Exactly.
I think anachronism might be there's a term for that. It's something that's like wildly out of place.
Yeah.
In terms of time. It's interesting. But I think, yes, the show does a very good job of building these worlds, but there are funny little moments like that where...
One day we should talk about the flag of Earth.
Okay. Did you see it?
Well, at the last scene, one of the last scene in the jail, he takes the flag and he puts her on the shoulder of Clarissa.
It was a UN flag, right?
It's an Earth flag.
Oh, I didn't catch it. What did it look like?
Well, it looks like the UN flag, but I would like to have time. I did not have time to do some study, but to look at the flag, exactly what the meaning of the flag, what exactly they put into this symbol. Because it's like the UN, but there is more things in it. So probably we could connect that with Luna, probably.
Probably, yeah, we should do that. All right, well, thank you for sticking with us through this discussion and tuning in. We are a product of the SETI Institute, which is a nonprofit research institution that is tasked with understanding the nature and origins of life in the universe. It's a pretty cool mission. And if you also think it's cool, if you're passionate about space, about finding out if we're alone, check out the links below. You can get notifications for the next episode of the Grudge Report, get our e-news, check out the website. You can also donate if you are so inclined, because as I said, we are a nonprofit and we rely on folks like you. So thank you again for tuning in. We love having this discussion, and we will be back soon to talk about the next episode. Until then, see you later.
Bye.